It's running. Okay, running.
So the movie reminds me, in a way, Life of Pi.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder if Kubo, what he did with the monkey and his father, it's all the adventure. It's maybe it's a shelter for him to about the truth, you know.
Oh, that's interesting. Like at the end of Life of Pi, right? Well, I think that is one way of looking at it. I mean, actually, we explored that. Like, is this real? Did this really happen? Is this just a fiction of his imagination? Is this just a way of him processing things that he's going through life? That is absolutely a way that you could look at the film. And I think the wonderful thing about art is that it's open oftentimes to lots of different kinds of interpretations. And I think that's part of the beauty of art, is that we bring our own imagination, our own experiences to observing it, and draw different things from it. At the end, when the way I look at the film, I see it in a more literal way. I mean, obviously the film is a maturation metaphor. The whole thing is a metaphor. I mean, if it's Pi, then I'm probably Pi, because this film is essentially a fantastic version of my own life. And my dad was not a samurai, and my mom wasn't a goddess or a talking monkey, but they were those types of things for me. They represented those kinds of things for me. And so Kubo, I think it's not unusual for the hero, the protagonist of a film, to be something of a stand-in or a proxy for the director. And that was the case for me. I mean, I really saw so much of myself in this boy and his experiences. And so you bring aspects of your own life to bear. You start, looking at your own childhood, your own parents, and now that I'm a father myself, looking at it through the other perspective as a father, and trying to bring those experiences of being a father and having my kids as well. And so those are all things that you weave into the film. And so the film itself, I believe in the film that all those things are taking place as we're watching them. But the whole thing is kind of meta. The whole thing is like Life of Pi, because it is a big metaphor.
What were the main references for Kubo?
I'm sorry, what?
What were the main references?
Well, there were, we had a lot of inspirations on the film. I think that when you look at the visual aesthetic of the film, a lot of it is heavily rooted and kindled by classic forms of Japanese art. So things like origami, obviously that was a big influence. Ukiyo-e, which is pictures of the floating world, woodblock prints. In fact, we wanted the whole thing to look and feel like a moving, living woodblock print. And so there was a lot of classic forms of Japanese art that we drew from for inspiration for the visual aesthetic of the film. In terms of like the story and the kind of films that we're telling, we were very much inspired by Akira Kurosawa and his classic big, epic samurai films. Hayao Miyazaki was a big influence for this film. I love Studio Ghibli films, and I love the way they treat the natural world and spirituality and, the different aspects of what it means to be human and the heroic ideal. Those were things that we try to weave into the film as well, to give it depth and resonance. And different classic stories, myths and fairy tales and folk tales, those all become inspiration for the story. The film is an original idea, but we wanted it to feel like it's a tale as old as time, like it's something that's been handed down over generations, like it's a classic old folk tale. And by drawing inspiration from the place that we did, hopefully it has that kind of a feeling.
About the choice of the animation technique, why did you choose to work in stop motion? And did you mix with other kind of CGI, and why?
Yeah, the film is a blend of a lot of things. When we started, like a little over 10 years ago, our studio, we, at the core founders, we were a group of stop motion artists, and we've been working in stop motion for most of our lives. I've been working in stop motion for 20 years. And in the 90s, we saw the ascendancy of the computer, the machine. And the computer started to do things like special effects that we used to do in stop motion, then it started to do long-form feature animation, which used to be the preserve of hand-drawn animation. And the computer was now gobbling up, taking all those things over, and it could do it with greater precision, greater flexibility, greater nuance than we could do as in the traditional forms of animation. And so when we started Laika, we were at an inflection point. We had to decide, is this a viable filmmaking medium to work in stop motion? Is there a way that we can take this technique that's been around since Georges Méliès was sending rockets to the moon and bring it into a new era, to reinvigorate it? And we decided to essentially embrace the author of our demise, to take the infernal machine and find ways to make peace with it and bring it into the process. Because the more we thought about it, we recognized that the computer really is just a tool, just like any piece of technology, a pencil, a sculpting tool, an X-Acto blade, a computer, they're all just tools that we can use to tell stories. And so when we started Leica, we put that to the test by bringing in rapid prototyping, 3D printing, stereoscopic photography, digital capture systems, laser cutting, things that had never been used in a stop motion production before. We brought all these things into the process, and it meant that we could tell different kinds of stories in different ways, and we saw that on Coraline. And then with every successive film, we've grown as artists, our technology grows, our artistry grows, and things just evolve over that time. And then we can apply everything that we learned to the next film. And that was the case with Kubo. It really is something of a hybrid, where at the foundational level, it's a stop motion film, and much of what you see on screen was shot on a set in front of a camera with puppets, and and everything is practical. But when we got to a point where there was a specific thing or an element or a shot or a background or whatever it happened to be, that it would be too difficult to do as a stop motion practical effect, well then we would bring technology into the mix. And it's that blend of things that I think is one of the things that makes this thing so visually distinctive.
Oh, sorry. Speaking of technique, what was your most difficult challenge? The challenge you met during filming Kubo? I mean, I made them a lot.
There were a lot of challenges. Like the mind reels, I go back to the catalog of things that were hard to do. I mean, to begin with, making a sweeping stop motion samurai epic, a big fantasy film, I mean, that's ridiculous to do in stop motion. It's never been done before, and for good reason, because it turns out it's super hard. It's just really, really hard to do. We knew there were going to be things that were going to be challenging, like the big mythological monsters. In the film we have this enormous skeleton. It's ridiculous. It's the biggest stop motion puppet ever made. It's 16 feet tall.
Wow.
It weighed 400 pounds. We had to develop a whole new system for animating it because it was so big we couldn't do it in the traditional method. And so we actually designed and built a piece of technology that we called a hexapod, which held up the body, and I think you see it at the end of the film. You see a bit of it at the end of the film. And it was a computerized mechanism that is essentially the same thing you see in a flight simulator or in a virtual reality ride at a theme park, like that kind of thing. And it allowed us to move the torso at all different axes, but still keep it supported so it wouldn't topple over and crush the animator, which it would have. That would be bad. We don't want that. It's very heavy. And then the other thing that was interesting, so we developed a piece of technology for it, but on the other hand, it was like an enormous marionette, because it had at its wrists these cables that were attached that were counterweighted, that went up to the ceiling and dropped back down, and they were held in place by big plastic buckets filled with sandbags. And so on the one hand, it's something, a cutting edge piece of technology that we invented. On the other hand, it's a bunch of crap you find in your garage and you put it together. And so it's that combination of things I think is really interesting about how we make films. So the big spectacle was hard. We have a raging storm at sea with a boat made of 250,000 individually placed leaves. There's all kinds of wacky spectacle that happens that's difficult to do. But I think the thing that is just as hard, but probably more important, was making sure those moments of stillness and connection between our characters work. That you have these intimate moments where characters are revealing themselves as people that with dreams and aspirations and vulnerabilities and pain, and you're feeling that connection between two dolls effectively.
Yeah.
That needed to really sing. In order for the film to work emotionally, you needed to feel that these were living, breathing creatures. And so while the spectacle was hard, the intimacy was just as hard, but more important.
Well, you managed that point. I was really moved when I saw the movie. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
In a child movie, often people is afraid to talk about death. You have not this fear. Can you explain why?
Well, I think that as we started to explore the film and what it meant, we started to realize that the story that we're telling was something of a maturation metaphor. It's about a boy who crosses the Rubicon from childhood to adulthood, and it's about exploring those things that we gain and the things that we leave behind along the way. And it is an unfortunate part of life to lose something, to lose things that matter to us. You don't get through life unscathed. We all suffer grief and loss and hurt, and we want to explore those ideas, those universal ideas, in a way that children can understand. So I think when you tell a story that is abstracted, slightly removed from reality, like animation or like in fantasy, where it's not quite reality, it takes a little bit of the sting out of it, and we can deal with things in a way that are more understandable for children, sometimes ways that are difficult to explain or discuss with children. When you see it on screen, dramatized in a stylized way, I think kids can get it in a more meaningful way. I think back to those experiences that I had when I was a kid, when I would be in a theater, in a cinema, in a darkened room with a bunch of strangers looking at a flickering image on the screen, and there was something magical about it, and you'd be transported to another world. And when those specific stories would kind of open up and talk about something that was real, talking about something that was meaningful or rich, it really would resonate with me as a child. It would make me think about things. It would make me feel things emotionally. And I think those are the kinds of stories that we want to tell here. For me, I experienced a lot of loss when I was growing up of people that I lost that were close to me, and I didn't really have those stories that would talk about things that would help me understand or help me process it. And that, even though it's not something that's necessarily a joyous thing to go through, there's something beautiful about the ideas that we explore in the film, where just because someone is not with us doesn't mean that we don't carry them with us. They may not physically be with us anymore, but they become part of our lives. They're woven into our own stories, and we carry them with us at all times. And I think that is something that it's a beautiful idea, and I think that kids can understand that, and it can help make going through loss an easier thing to absorb.
Can you tell us how the screenplayers work together with the technical teams?
Say it again?
Can you tell us how the screenplayers work together with the technical team?
Well, it's the beginning of the process. You're developing the story. So the first 2.5 years, you're trying to figure out who these characters are, what this world is, what the themes are, what aspects of your own life do you weave into to get meaning and resonance. And so before we do anything, it's all about that. It's figuring out the screenplay, figuring out the story, and then you get to a point where we feel pretty good about that foundation, and then you figure out, okay, how can you bring it to life in the best way? How do you visualize it? And that's when you start your designs. That's when you start bringing in your artists who pre-visualize things, who design the characters, who are coming up with their concept illustrations for the world, what it looks like. And then little by little, you start bringing people into the process. And then you get to that point where, how are we going to do this technically? And because our team, typically, like in a live action film, you'll shoot this stuff practically, then you have your visual effects, your post teams who are doing all the CGI at the end. Well, our teams are all integrated, so we have every single key department head at the beginning of the film will get together, and we'll go with our head of rigging and costuming and puppet and lighting and camera and our art department and our visual effects team. Everybody gets together and we figure out how we're going to bring the film to life in the best way. And so those are always really exciting discussions, because everybody pitches in and it becomes a combination of all those different perspectives and talents. And so we never really have a post process. It's all part of it from the beginning. We'll try to figure out how to shoot it in the best way, and for those things that we can't shoot practically, what our technical and visual effects teams will bring to it to add to it. And so I just love that combination of different perspectives and techniques. It starts with the idea, and then it builds once you bring on those artists at the end.
I got a question about the music in the movie. The guitar has a very important place.
Yeah.
And what can you tell us about the music and the choice of the song of the Beatles in the credits?
The music played a huge role in this film, obviously, for obvious reasons. Kubo is a musician. He's a storyteller, but he tells story through his music. And that's like any artist, his emotions, his feelings, his experiences come out through his art. And so when he's essentially like an Orpheus figure. He's like a mythic figure who's gifted with divine music, whose music is so beautiful he can actually coax the rocks and the trees to dance. And so when we first started talking to our composer, Dario Marianelli, who we previously worked with on the Boxtrolls, I started telling him about the story and about this character and how he's essentially this gifted with godlike music. And so I said, okay, Dario, what I need you to do is I need you to write godlike music, all right?
Okay.
No pressure. And so Dario is such an extraordinary gifted musician. He absolutely dove into what the themes of the film were. He understood what they were. He dove into classic Japanese scales and wove that into a more romantic Western score. And so those things were kind of commingling, living together in this beautiful cross-cultural exchange. And I think music is so important for this movie, and he did a tremendous job in using the music to evoke emotion. And it's just a beautiful score. It plays more important role in this film than anything we've done, and he just did an exquisite job. For the end theme, I was looking for, and I wanted to find a song that really perfectly encapsulated some of the themes of the film, and so I started thinking about the Beatles. When I was growing up, I grew up in a Beatles household, effectively. My mother was a teenager when the Beatles came to America for the first time, so she loved them, and as a consequence, so did I. And in a film that's fundamentally about mothers and their children, I thought there was something beautifully poetic about sharing, at the end of this film, sharing something that my mother had shared with me when I was a kid, which this song, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, it really is a beautiful and timeless expression of love and empathy, which is really kind of at its core what this film is about. And so, we'd hoped that, we could have that song, but, it's the Beatles, God knows, they're not going to let us use this song. And so we actually reached out to Olivia Harrison, and she let us use the song in the film, which I was shocked by. But, when we shared the ultimate song with her, she absolutely loved it, which I felt like my heart was going to explode. It was such a beautiful moment. But we didn't want it to feel like it was just something that was like a pop song that was slapped on at the end of it. We wanted it to feel like it was woven of the same fabric and thread that the rest of the film was. And so we continue to work with Dario Marianelli about, okay, how can we reimagine this beautiful, incredible rock song as something that came from this same period, and it feels like it comes from the same instrumentation and philosophy as the rest of the score. And so we had a really unusual approach. Everything that we use in the film, we use the end song, where nothing was plugged into the wall. These were all live instruments, and a lot of them, instrumentation from Japan, along with romantic instruments like violas and violins and cellos and basses and French horns. And there was just so many beautiful instruments that were all we recorded live in the room, and with this incredible arrangement that honored the original George Harrison, George Martin Beatles arrangement, but also wove elements of themes from the film into the song. And so it really is all those things combined, and I feel like it really is the perfect end to the movie. It's a song that that my mother gifted to me, and it was effectively wrapped up all the themes of the film in this one song, and I think it's just the perfect way to end the movie. Yeah.
So for the voices, you have a varied cast, and I would like to know if at any moment on the project you thought to work with a Japanese actor for the international release, for the voices.
Yeah, so we have the cast that we have in the English language release in America and in the UK and Australia, and then the film gets tailored for every market. So we get different actors in each market to bring the character to life in the best way. And what we do is we work with our partners at Universal and casting directors in each territory, and what we essentially do is we talk about trying to capture a certain kind of quality, a certain kind of voice. We want an actor who can bring the character to life in this way, whose voice sounds like this, because when you have only the audio, you don't get the visual of the actor. You need to be able to, they need to be able to bring the character to life emotionally in the best way possible. And it becomes almost like an orchestra where each voice has to occupy its own area of the sonic spectrum, and you want each instrument to either work harmoniously with each other, or if they need to clash because they're in contrast with each other, they'll clash. And so that becomes the trick, is finding actors who have the right sound of voice, who can have the right emotion that they can bring to it, and work within the context of the overall film. And so we go to great pains when we cast films for the English language version to make sure all those things are balanced. And then when we work with our casting directors internationally, we want to make sure that's happening in every territory. And of course, I am not an expert in the best voice actors in Finland or in Spain or in Italy or Portugal or where it happens to be. And so what we try to do is work with casting directors who understand what we're going for, and then hopefully they will do it. But we're just right now talking with distributors in Japan, and I have a wish list of Japanese actors I would love to cast if that ends up working out. So we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Thank you. I'm sorry, it's finished.
Oh, that's it? We're just getting warmed up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your future plans.
More stuff. We're actually shooting our next film right now.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Maybe
Is it
more,
about children? Because I
It's
noticed.
not.
Oh wow.
maybe more Oscars?
Well, from your lips, well, hopefully, fingers crossed. People love the film, which I appreciate. People have responded really beautifully to the film, so I really do appreciate that.
I'm sure you're going to enter the Guinness Book soon with all the animation techniques and so.
Thanks. Well,
Well,
we love what
thank
we
you.
do. We're very passionate about what we do.
And we can tell actually, as you will.
Yeah, I do think that comes through. I mean, people absolutely love creating these things, and I do think it comes through. I think you can see that love and that wonder on the screen.
Merci.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.